priceless ancient treasures torn out of the ground, precious art ripped from walls and sold to the highest bidder.
22, 24, 26.
Welcome to a multi-billion-dollar black market nobody wants to talk about. Until now, the grandest of mankind's achievements reduced to obscene commodities. The spoils snatched up by wealthy collectors from shady middlemen, laundered through a network of liars and thieves. It's a global crime wave, where the cash ends up in the pockets of the world's worst criminals, while nobody asks the big questions. How can it still be happening? Welcome to a modern tragedy. History itself, dug up, destroyed, sold off. This is loot. A fancy new museum dedicated to the Bible, right in the heart of Washington, D.C. Sounds like a righteous idea.
Museum of the Bible visitors enter through monumental recreations of the printing plates used in the first mass-produced Bible.
Until the aptly named Museum of the Bible is plagued with a PR disaster of biblical proportions.
Hobby Lobby also paid a $3 million fine and forfeited thousands of artifacts that investigators say were illegally removed from Iraq and sold to the company.
All roads lead to the proudly Christian Hobby Lobby retail empire, where Steve Green, evangelical crusader and the museum's founder.
We're not pushing our agenda, our faith. We just want you to learn about this book.
Is caught red-handed with over 11,000 ancient artifacts looted from Egypt and the Middle East. And the macabre twist? Word is they were first dug out of the ground by the same Muslim extremists hell-bent on killing God-fearing U.S. soldiers.
The trade's main target buyers are, ironically, history enthusiasts and art aficionados in the United States and Europe, representatives of the societies which ISIS has pledged to destroy.
It begins with a chance find at U.S. Customs and will end with Hobby Lobby and its founding family, the Greens, millions of dollars out of pocket, and the reputation of their dream museum tarnished.
I think the Museum of the Bible have missed the most important commandment, which is, "Thou shalt not steal."
Oklahoma City, home of the world's first shopping cart, and the only U.S. capital with its own oil well. It's also the place Hobby Lobby calls home. It's an empire with humble roots. In 1970, on a wing and a prayer, David and Barbara Green take out a loan for $600 to finance a miniature picture frame business out of their own home. 2 years later, they opened the doors of their first arts and crafts store in Oklahoma City. The timing is perfect. The hippie craze for tie-dye, beads, and macrame lay the foundations. And at a strong case for the power of prayer, today, David Green and his family control a fortune just shy of $9 billion.
Hobby Lobby started collecting material, I think, in the early 2000s. And Hobby Lobby is a for-profit corporation in the United States, and it's owned by the evangelical Green family.
Hobby Lobby becomes the go-to place for American crafty church-going folk. Today, it's a part of the nation's fabric, with over 900 stores and 43,000 employees in the U.S. Hobby Lobby ranks at number 79 on Forbes' list of America's largest private companies. If you ask the Green family, they'd credit their success to the grace of God. And they pay him his dues. Hobby Lobby stores are closed on Sundays, so staff can pray and spend time with their families. And the owners can give thanks to the Lord for their earthly success. This religious devotion is perhaps no more on show than in their very public 2014 challenge to Obamacare. The new law mandates that companies provide its female employees with contraception coverage. But not on Hobby Lobby's watch. Steve Green will go on to found the Bible Museum. But it's his father, David, who launches the controversial Supreme Court challenge.
The chain was the subject of a high-profile Supreme Court case in which the company successfully argued that providing some types of birth control to employees violated their religious freedom.
Religious belief wins the day, and the Greens no longer need to follow the contraceptive mandate. While his father fights the government, Steve Green is making his own big statement about faith. He's planning a one-stop shop of biblical artifacts and relics to prove his devotion to the Lord. So where's the best place to find biblical artifacts? Well, the place the Bible was written, of course, the Middle East. At its heart, the land once known as Mesopotamia.
So a place like Iraq became sort of on the radar, let's just say, of Western countries in the 19th century, beginning in the mid-19th century, particularly because of the connections to the Bible. You have, of course, the creation myth and all these stories that are affiliated more or less with this ancient land of Mesopotamia. So you had explorers going there, finding tablets, in some cases finding stories that were very comparable to the Bible.
Unfortunately, Steve Green is hardly an authority on Antiquities or the Middle East. For that, he's going to need an expert, a like-minded man of faith.
The Green family were interested in establishing a museum of the Bible, which would tell the story of the Bible. And to stock that museum, they wanted objects which would related to the Bible more or less closely, and this would include archaeological objects from biblical times. So they were actively in the market to buy cuneiform tablets from Iraq.
Dr. Scott Carroll isn't your run-of-the-mill academic. He's a showman. The dial tone on his phone? The Indiana Jones theme. But Carroll is a true believer, and that's the only qualification Steve Green is really concerned about. Green is a man in a hurry, so he lets Scott Carroll off the leash. Over 3 years, Carroll chalks up more than 1 million miles of travel inspecting likely prospects for the Green collection. That's a trip to the moon and back. $70 million later, the Greens boast a heavenly collection of nearly 55,000 biblical artifacts.
Steve Green appeared on the market scene around 2009, and they went for a shopping spree, right? Now, the appearance of a collector like that, with, highly invested, unleashed, so to speak, the worst forces of the market and also the worst forces of academia.
Carroll is confident he knows what he's doing. And why wouldn't he? After all, he's on a mission from God. But the biblical artifacts on Carroll's list come from one of the world's most troubled regions, where war and conflict has become a way of life, the Middle East. Carroll is flying blind, and he's bound to run into trouble. In July of 2010, the crusade begins. Scott Carroll thinks he's sniffed out a big score in Dubai. He and Steve Green fly into the vast desert metropolis.
So they went out to the Emirates and they bought all this material, and they arranged to have it shipped back in several shipments to the United States.
The two men walk into the hotel conference room, and Steve Green's mind is blown. Thousands of antiquities spread on the floor, stacked on top of each other on a coffee table, and packed loosely in cardboard boxes. The three antiquities dealers who've brought the loot are there to do a deal. They're offering a jaw-dropping 5,500 artifacts. Their total value? A whopping $12 million. But the special price for Steve Green? Just $2 million. Being the retail magnate that he is, Steve Green knows all about markdowns and discounts. He heads home, figuring he's just scored the bargain of a lifetime. It might be God's work, but is it all just too good to be true? Back in Oklahoma, Green and Hobby Lobby's lawyer get in touch with a superstar in cultural property law, Professor Patty Gerstenblith.
In the summer of 2010, I was contacted by the in-house legal counsel at the Hobby Lobby Corporation. The in-house legal counsel told me that the Greens were considering acquiring Antiquities, and that the lawyer had concerns. At his request, I went to Oklahoma City, where I did a presentation in which I explained the general issues involved in legal and illegal aspects of the international art market, particularly as applied to antiquities. So I laid all that out. Later, I was very surprised to learn that, in fact, when I went to speak to them, the Green family was already in the process of acquiring antiquities.
Artifacts with shady dealers taken from the war-torn Middle East? And no effective legal consultation? Alarm bells should be ringing. Patty raises her concerns, but for whatever reason, Steve Green never gets the message, and Hobby Lobby continues their negotiations for the loot from Dubai.
And I think the Green family themselves are very naive at the time. I don't think they really understood the antiquities market. I don't think they understood what they were getting into. And they employed this agent to sniff out material for them. And he came up with a few thousand cuneiform tablets in the hands of Israeli and an Emirati dealer.
Getting it into the U.S. is not going to be straightforward, though, thanks to strict import laws. There's a good reason for that. In 2016, the U.S. Task Force on Terrorist Financing will learn the extent to which terrorist organizations profit from the sale of antiquities to the West.
Both ISIL and the Assad regime are participating in looting and are realizing income from the sale of antiquities. Because of the unknown nature of recently looted antiquities, databases of stolen art are, for the most part, useless for regulating the antiquities trade.
2015, as part of this whole push against ISIS and trying to stop terrorism financing, the UN Security Council basically banned the sale and trafficking of any antiquities coming out of Iraq and Syria.
So looking at trade sanctions that were imposed on Iraq, antiquities were included in the types of items that were sanctioned from trade. As these trade sanctions were lifted after 2003, the sanctions on antiquities were not lifted. It was still against the rules internationally to trade in Iraqi antiquities.
When the news hits that Islamic State is lining its pockets through the sale of loot, the U.S. government is on the warpath.
Evidence that ISIS has sanctioned the looting and sale of antiquities to generate revenue for terrorism is a game changer.
As long as Western collectors are willing to pay for objects without asking questions of where did they come from, how did you get them, it will continue to see the funding of bad activities, very often armed conflict, military conquest, things that lead not only to destruction of cultural heritage, but also to the death of people.
This is exactly what Professor Gerstenblith is trying to warn Hobby Lobby about. And Steve Green is in the dark. But even if he did get the message, would it have swayed him from his divine mission?
In theory, Mr. Green was looking for artifacts connected with the history of the Bible. But in practice, actually, a lot of things have to do with the Bible. So he was really sort of ransacking the market in many areas.
It is a bitter irony that a quest for objects for a Bible museum comes at a very heavy cost.
These events in Iraq in 2003 and more recently in Syria have painfully demonstrated destruction of cherished artistic and religious treasures is the starter gun that precedes genocide and the human suffering that follows.
Museums believe they are institutions of power. They think that collecting looted objects gives them power and prestige, and it's actually a crime. And I think that the world conscience is going to grow, and much as we look back down on slavery, that it was something that's very black on our history, we're going to look at cultural looting the same in the upcoming years.
Collectors wanting to do the right thing need to understand where the items they're buying come from and where their money ends up. Key to that is a thing called provenance, which refers to the history of an artifact.
I do think that auction houses could do much better in terms of provenance research. It is astonishing how little background to the history of ownership of items they are offering is provided in catalogs.
While accurately identifying provenance is an important weapon in the fight against looted artifacts, it is often far too easy for dealers and middlemen to work their way around historical records.
You know, an export document may be a forged document. And so what happens is there's a specific strategy in many circles of the industry to move up the ladder from less important trade sources to more important ones, and each step of the way creates a veneer of credibility so that when the object gets to the good faith market, everything's out of control. And so a means that anchors information every step of the way would shut down the problem.
Steve Green and Hobby Lobby aren't asking the right questions. Or, if they are, they're not paying enough attention to the answers.
If someone wanted to purchase an antiquity legally, it is possible to do so, but there are a number of red flags that need to be watched out for. And I think perhaps the biggest red flag is provenance.
But provenance isn't even on Steve Green and Scott Carroll's radar. August 2010. Carroll hightails it to Israel and meets with the same guys who'd filled a Dubai conference room with boxes of goodies just a month earlier. They tell him the antiquities come from a family collection, picked up at a local market in the 60s. If that doesn't sound shifty enough, they tell him the loot has been stored in the US since the 70s, but was sent to Dubai just for their meeting. Right. The story is becoming less credible by the minute. But Green and Carroll swallow it, hook, line, and sinker. By December 2010, just 5 months after first eyeing the loot, Green puts pen to paper on a purchase agreement. The final price, $1.6 million. With that fateful signature, Steve Green sets himself up as an object lesson for any would-be collector. Because while the price for loot is high, the price for getting caught is even higher.
Well, I think the Hobby Lobby example is a cautionary tale because, in a way, they were caught out.
Green has bagged himself a giant slice of biblical history at a bargain basement price. That's right, 90% off. 5,500 Mesopotamian antiquities stashed in a Dubai hotel room. But when the invoice arrives on Hobby Lobby's desk, it falsely identifies the country of origin as Israel. It's all looking so dicey, even the pathologically optimistic Scott Carroll is beginning to have doubts. He claims that he twice tells Steve Green to wash his hands of the deal. Green's reply? That his family isn't averse to risk. And that could be his downfall.
120 bid in between bids. It's yours at the moment, 120.
Buyers are buying these pieces without any information at all about their past. And on the one hand, a lack of provenance, a lack of background information about the specifics of how an antiquity was exported and its ownership history. It is often surprising to many people to find out that most antiquities are sold on the market without any provenance at all, without any background or history.
22, 24, 26, 28, 3,000.
This is extremely risky. And when we're talking about issues related to false provenance, buyers really need to do their homework.
32,000 all done at 32,000. Sure? You're selling now. You all done?
Hobby Lobby and Steve Green's huge buying spree fires up the demand side of the looting market. Eager to get in on the bonanza, dealers are on the lookout for new material, while looters on the ground get very, very busy.
The appearance of green was seen as an occasion for dealers, for academics, and of course, yes, for potentially for looters as well. That is, if there was high demand.
But like in all industries, increasing demand means the exploitation of workers at the supply end. The looting business is no different.
There are looters that very often are poor people exploited by middlemen and by those dealers who really make huge money in countries like the United Kingdom, the US, and others.
While Western dealers see nothing but dollar signs, for those on the ground, it's a matter of life and death.
Antiquities freshly looted from the ground have no established value and no documented history. They can be mined from the ground as new commodities. Therefore, they are the perfect vehicle for moving funds and value around the world and for supporting illegal activities, such as trade-based money laundering, purchase of drugs and weapons, organized crime, and terrorism.
I have seen moments where two looting gangs have shot each other at Dashur. People were actually being killed in front of my eyes in exchange for objects. I mean, it is causing a lot of cultural desecration as well as loss of human life.
By December of 2010, Steve Green has signed the deal of the century. And now the tricky part begins, getting the loot into America. The Israeli dealers tell Hobby Lobby they know how to get around customs. They suggest FedEx with one key recommendation: keep the value of each parcel under $2,000, and they won't need to clear customs. The dealers also want multiple addresses for shipments. They pack $1.6 million in loot into 8 packages. They label each as tile samples and dispatch them to 3 different addresses. They think they're being tricky, but U.S. Customs agents know it's a common tactic used by smugglers. The parcels depart the United Arab Emirates, and in January of 2011, they arrive in the United States. The first 3 packages sail through customs. The other 5, not so much.
A couple of shipments were intercepted by US Customs, and they were marked deceptively. The shipments were marked as containing tiles. They weren't marked as containing cuneiform tablets. So again, you have this standard thing in the antiquities trade of trying to hide the nature of the material. So those seizures led to a broader investigation of material in the Hobby Lobby collection.
It's not known what raises the red flag with customs. It might have been the klutzy use of multiple addresses, but it also might have been the source of the so-called tile samples. Israel. As the only country in the region that gives the green light to antiquities sales, Israel is well known as a clearance point for loot from other Middle Eastern countries. Over 40,000 ancient artifacts are exported from Israel each year, and it's estimated that looters supply dealers with 99% of the antiquities for sale in the country.
The key issue with these policy attempts to prevent the trafficking of antiquities out of this region is that ancient borders are not modern borders. An object that originated in Iraq or Syria can look like an object that maybe came from Lebanon or Jordan, but the policy we have in place is only focused on Iraq and only focused on Syria. So if you're thinking like an antiquities smuggler, you're thinking about somebody wanting to create a false background for a piece, and you're wanting to avoid the very obvious red flags, red light of an object being from Iraq or Syria, well, why don't you say it's from Jordan?
The Israeli dealers who sell Steve Green his loot will later be charged with selling Hobby Lobby more than $22 million in stolen antiquities over 4 years. So the $1.6 million he handed them in January of 2011, that was just the beginning. In the US, the wheels of justice grind into action, and law enforcement begins to run a fine-tooth comb over Steve Green's growing collection.
News broke out that there was an investigation concerning the shipment of material to Hobby Lobby, but that was just, the beginning of a wider investigation.
By 2015, Hobby Lobby's collection of antiquities totals more than 40,000. And in 2017, Hobby Lobby is called to account.
Hobby Lobby also paid a $3 million fine and forfeited thousands of artifacts that investigators say were illegally removed from Iraq and sold to the company.
The antiquities Green bought in Dubai are forfeited. And although it's reported that Hobby Lobby is fined $3 million, that's not quite how it happens. Hobby Lobby has to forfeit $3 million to cover property illegally brought into the US because there's $3 million worth of loot missing. To this day, nobody knows where it is.
Ultimately, I think that that's why we see so much fewer convictions when it comes to the white-collar side of this. They're just harder to convict.
Steve Green comes clean and delivers a public mea culpa. In years to come, Professor Patty Gerstenblith will recall that she warned him, but he went ahead anyway. In the scheme of things, $3 million is little more than a slap on the wrist. Most significantly, there's no criminal prosecution.
It's very rare for people on the market end of the antiquities smuggling chain who engage in crimes not only to be successfully prosecuted for those crimes, but to even be charged or investigated or at times even detected. And I think this rests a lot in their white-collar status and the nature of white-collar crime.
Unfortunately, the looting of archaeological sites is big business, often carried out on an organized, industrialized scale and in response to market demand. And many of these sites are unknown before they are looted. As cultural objects move from source, transit, and destination countries, different legal systems create obstacles to interdiction of objects and prosecution of crimes, and they allow the laundering of title to these artifacts. The United States is the single largest market for art in the world, with 43% of market share.
Many of the people who are fighting antiquities smuggling on the ground would like to see the crime taken more seriously.
I'd like to start by pointing out that at the moment it's not illegal, or not necessarily clearly illegal, to bring antiquities from Syria into the United States. They have not been included in the OFAC sanctions, and there's no general legal principle.
Well, that's a huge hole, yes.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, which would be, we hope, plugged very soon, and that is not even a criminal provision. That is only going to be something that leads to civil forfeiture.
Until the laws change and it becomes a criminal offense prosecutable under the Terrorism Act, you're just not going to get major change in people's behavior. Because for every item that is looted, there are hundreds of other items that they don't, and they're still making a lot of money. Until people say to them, all right, I catch you with something that has been recently looted, I'm going to prosecute you under the Terrorism Act because you probably put money in some terrorist organization's pockets.
Steve Green pushes ahead with his divine mission. He opens the Museum of the Bible with a bang. Guests pay an eye-popping $50,000 per table to attend its black tie opening event. Hosted in the ballroom of Washington's Trump Hotel. Donald Trump's son, Eric, attends. Relationships like this are vital to the maintenance of major museums. And the Bible Museum is no different. It needs more than faith to keep it running. It needs cash. In the US, museums have a powerful weapon in their arsenal to bring these collectors on board: tax write-offs.
Another major problem I think that critics have with Hobby Lobby is that Hobby Lobby is a for-profit organization, whereas the Museum of the Bible is a non-profit organization, yet they're both controlled, if you like, by the Green family.
If that heavily discounted collection bought in Dubai had made it to the Museum of the Bible, Hobby Lobby would have made a tidy sum from the difference between the purchase price of $1.2 million and the actual value of $12 million.
Because of the availability of the charitable tax deduction, the ability to import works of art and artifacts without payment of tariffs, and because of artistic preference, the United States is the largest ultimate market for antiquities, particularly those from the Mediterranean and Middle East.
In the US, if you want to be a high-end antiques collector, all you need is a good accountant. The Greens obviously had one.
So it's possible for the Green family to buy material through Hobby Lobby, then donate it to the non-profit Museum of the Bible and claim a tax deduction for their internal donation. And if the appraised value of material being donated to the Museum of the Bible is a lot higher than what they paid for the material in the first place, they will actually make a profit.
It's no wonder wealthy collectors aren't too keen for things to change anytime soon.
Wealthy people who have objects, and wealthy people have power, so wealth and power go hand in hand. Wealthy and powerful people who are likely to have many antiquities are the ones who are also potentially watering down some of our laws that could protect these antiquities from being stolen in the first place.
$52,000 sold.
The tax perks mean that cut-price stolen antiquities can be more appealing to collectors with the bottom line in mind.
There are fantastic bargains throughout the whole range tonight.
And museums desperate to build up their collections may decide to turn a blind eye to the source of the collector's loot. That's not to say it's the norm, but it can develop into a mutually dependent and not particularly healthy relationship.
Collectors often have quite close relationships with museums, and museums see collectors as being potential donors, not just of money, but of the actual objects themselves. It's an interesting back and forth that isn't just financial, but it is influence.
When Hobby Lobby donates to the Museum of the Bible, they're donating to the Greens' own nonprofit organization. And Hobby Lobby plans to donate everything it buys. If an artifact's value jumps after its purchase, tax write-off balloons. It's why the Greens launched the project they call their Scholars Initiative.
We are engaging leading scholars ourselves, and they're doing research. If there's something that's not what it claims to be, we want to know about it, and we'll share if we find that out.
Let's bear in mind that Green had also these Green Scholar initiatives, so he was throwing money also for having academics working on the material that he was collecting. And of course, academics who publish about a text and artifacts make that text, that artifact, more expensive later on, because if you find that what seems to be just a little fragment of nothing is, let's say, 3 lines from a letter of Paul to the Corinthians, that will give that fragment more value.
The Green family want the focus of the Bible Museum and their collection to be on the word of the Lord. But no matter what they do, their collecting activities are drawing most of the headlines. As federal investigators continue to pick over the vast collection, there's one artifact Steve Green is absolutely sure will pass muster. It's the high point of his collection. And it certainly didn't come from a cardboard box in a hotel room. This one is completely above board. Meet the Gilgamesh Dream Tablet.
The Epic of Gilgamesh is a story about this sort of hero king who lived in the city of Uruk, who goes on this journey to live forever. There are many versions of this story. It's the oldest known epic story in the world, almost more than 4,000 years ago.
Steve Green picks it up at Christie's auction. And at $1.7 million, this single cuneiform tablet costs him more than the entire collection from Dubai.
Steve Green had bought it through Christie's in 2014, probably thinking that by acquiring it from a reputable auction house, it would be protected from the kind of illegal activity that happened in 2010 and 2011. They did not realize that the dealers back in the chain of the Gilgamesh tablet, going back to 2001, had in fact falsified the provenance, claiming that it was in the United States since 1981.
It's about the size of a paperback and is 3,500 years old. But in the world of biblical antiquities, this clay tablet is a superstar.
It also contains stories that, in fact, led to some of the interest in Mesopotamia in the first place, particularly the story about the flood. The flood actually was a separate story in a way from Gilgamesh, but also made its way into the Epic of Gilgamesh as a kind of sub-story or another story recounted by one of the characters. Sometimes he's called the Babylonian Noah.
The epic tells the story of a great flood and its own version of Adam and Eve, only it was written 1,000 years before the Bible. That's what gets Steve Green and Christian scholars so excited. Steve Green's Dubai loot has already been seized when he buys the tablet. He's learned some valuable lessons and figures if he's dealing with Christie's now, surely he can trust them.
Auction houses could do much better in terms of provenance research. So I would recommend any collector to check provenance carefully with a lot of attention paid to the documents that actually certify or not certify that an item is licit.
But yet again, the warning signs are there. Auction houses like Christie's usually sell objects through public auction. But the Gilgamesh tablet is offered for sale privately, meaning it never appears in a public catalog. In fact, most people wouldn't even know it was on the market.
Skeptics will argue that's why the auction houses are selling them privately, because they understand that if they sell them publicly through auction, the shady origins, if you like, of these objects will be open for all to see and for all to investigate. Now, auction houses, of course, will deny that vigorously. Again, we can look at the Gilgamesh tablet that Hobby Lobby brought off Christie's through a private treaty sale, and Hobby Lobby have alleged, and the US authorities have alleged, that Christie's sold it deliberately through private treaty sale because they were aware of its suspicious provenance. But again, Christie's have denied that allegation.
When the truth is revealed about its origins, the Gilgamesh tablet becomes a case study in how looted artifacts sneak into the market. The tablet was unearthed in 1853 in the ruins of an Assyrian king's library in northern Iraq. Sometime after the first Gulf War in 1991, the tablet is spirited out of Iraq. Covered in dirt and unreadable, it works its way to London.
But the real catastrophe happens when, as happened after the first Gulf War, as you mentioned, there was a breakdown of law and order, there was a breakdown of the state apparatus, and that then created a flood of looting and in turn artifacts moving onto the market itself.
At the end of the first Gulf War in the 1990s, there were two things that really prompted the looting. First of all, we had United Nations sanctions which were placed on Iraq, and this caused a lot of economic stress in Iraqi society. People lost their jobs, people's livelihoods were threatened, people were looking for ways of making money. You know, they needed to make ends meet. And archaeological sites obviously offered one resource that could be exploited.
In London, a dealer buys the tablet and posts it to the US. Needless to say, he doesn't declare it to customs. After changing hands several times, it finally resurfaces, offered up for sale by a Californian bookseller for $500,000. Next stop, Christie's, at more than 3 times that price. It's considered one of the greatest ancient Mesopotamian finds of the century. Wealthy dealers, museums, and collectors have their eye on the prize, but they don't stop to think of the cultural damage that's been done by removing it from its homeland. The same isn't true of the Iraqi people. Iraq's ambassador, Farid Yassin, makes a heartfelt plea.
Our history is really important to us. Our history is what makes us. We're an old country. In fact, I can say we're the oldest country. And so you can't take that from us, and this is why the attachment to our artifacts is so deeply rooted amongst Iraqis.
Steve Green, like many collectors before him, had big dreams. He wanted the Museum of the Bible to tell the story of the good book. But he never stopped to think about the impact of his actions on the people living in the lands that gave birth to the Bible.
I think the Museum of the Bible, as I have read in one of the recent articles, have missed the most important commandment, which is thou shalt not steal. And it is such a big shame that it would have the name of the Bible in its name, and it has been acting in such unethical attitude towards many cultures. I mean, the amount of Coptic material, looted Coptic material that ended in the Hobby Lobby Museum is insane. The amount of Iraqi and Syrian is also quite a lot.
There's no suggestion that Steve Green set out to buy stolen antiquities, but he certainly didn't ask enough questions.
At the moment, we have a case where the Hobby Lobby Corporation is suing Christie's auction house in London because it bought an Iraqi cuneiform tablet at Christie's for more than $1 million. And the tablet was subsequently seized by US law enforcement and returned to Iraq.
In 2019, US Homeland Security investigations seized the Gilgamesh Dream Tablet from the Museum of the Bible. And 2 years later, it is finally returned to its homeland of Iraq.
This ceremony here is also a welcome warning to the smugglers and looters of this world, to those who use conflicts to steal and to traffic cultural heritage, participating in the destruction of cultural diversity. Iraq has suffered so much from this kind of destruction, most recently again during the occupation by ISIS.
Trusting 3 dodgy dealers in a Dubai hotel was a bad idea. But Steve Green had no reason to suspect a Christie's sale would land him in trouble. And he's not one to forgive and forget. In May 2020, Hobby Lobby files a lawsuit alleging Christie's should have known the Gilgamesh tablet's provenance was faked. Christie's denies any wrongdoing.
So Hobby Lobby, I think quite rightly, are asking why on earth Christie's was marketing such an object. What research had Christie's done into the provenance of the object, into the previous ownership of the object?
Although there has been improvement in the scrutiny of objects sold at public auction, there remains a high degree of willful ignorance by some collectors eager to add to their collections.
Author and anti-looting crusader Robert Edsel was crystal clear in his 2016 House testimony. Ignorance is no excuse for turning a blind eye to the illicit trade in arts and antiquities.
Worse still is their lack of knowledge about the history of what they already own. Some don't want to know. Privacy alone cannot be an argument for doing nothing when the stakes for the common good are so high.
The case against Christie's is unresolved. It could be Judgment Day for the auction trade and the murky world of antiquities smuggling, and a glimmer of hope for the women and men fighting to stop it.
So the global annual trade in illicit art and antiquities is hard to stop. Looted objects are hidden away for long periods. False documentation on their provenance is routine, and transactions have proven difficult to track through traditional customs enforcement and financial intelligence.
Counterterrorism analyst Yahya Fanusi advocates a strict enforcement of the law.
Even a handful of strategic terror financing designations by OFAC, the EU, and the UN imposed on the worst offenders would likely have a chilling effect.
The Hobby Lobby example should be a wake-up call to any future private collectors who are thinking of building up a large collection of previously unknown material, in that the risk is there of discovery and of large financial loss if you lose possession of the material.
Meanwhile, academics hope that Steve Green and Hobby Lobby's experience might change the way people think about buying antiquities. Stumbling onto Hobby Lobby's loot at customs might have been a fluke. But how much slips through the net? Customs agents have to hunt down guns, drugs, victims of human trafficking. They don't always have the time, expertise, or resources to give loot the attention it so desperately needs.
To making antiquities looting an intelligence and law enforcement priority. At present, it's unclear who in the US government is even responsible for countering antiquities trafficking. Reform can only come about by declaring this issue a national security priority. The US government must designate a lead organization and provide adequate authorization and resources.
But if collectors like the Greens start to think about ancient coins the same way they think about ivory or blood diamonds, then demand will dry up and looting will stop.
The trade's main target buyers are, ironically, history enthusiasts and art aficionados in the United States and Europe, representatives of the societies which ISIS has pledged to destroy.
Education is really important. That is, any one of us who is working on material objects need, somehow to pass to the new generations this awareness of the ethics and the laws surrounding the handling of these artifacts as scholars, as dealers, as normal citizens. So education is really important.